Welcome to the Dawn to Dusk podcast with your host, Douglas Wood, author of From Dawn to Dusk, How to Build a Multi-Million-Dollar Law Practice and Then Give It Away. In each episode, Doug interviews distinguished legal professionals who have masterfully navigated their careers from inception to retirement and explores the intricacies of building a successful law practice and transitioning to retirement when the right time comes. Now, let's join Doug for today's insightful discussion.
Welcome to the Dawn to Dusk podcast. My guest today is Robert Darwell. He's a senior partner at Shepherd Mullen and heads their global media and entertainment technology and advertising law practice. He received his BA from Arizona State, his JD from Georgetown, and studied at the Sorbonne, which we're going to definitely want to know a little bit more about later on. Among his clients include Amazon, Meta, Twitch, Nickelodeon, Disney, Peacock, USA Networks, and the playoff bound and playoff contenders LA Clippers, who have had a very checkered history, but now they're on the top of the heap, so they're looking great. Bob has worked in development, finance, and distribution of hundreds of motion pictures and television productions, including what he describes in his bio as his favorites, Traffic, Brokeback Mountain, and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and many, many more. His honors and awards could fill pages and include things like the Beverly Hills Bar Association Entertainment of the Year, the Clay Award as California's Entertainment Lawyer of the Year, the Los Angeles Times Entertainment Business Visionary, Billboard's Top 100 Lawyers, and the Hollywood Reporter Power Lawyer for 20 consecutive years, which is an amazing honor. But in his spare time, you might run into Bob as a DJ in such places as Paris, Hollywood, Zurich, and Mexico City, of all places. So he'll tell us a little bit more about that later, too. And as if that were not enough, he recently directed 2 award-winning documentary films, The 90s Club, which strikes a hard blow against ageism, something near and dear to me, and Black Uniform, which focuses on 12 Black men and women who served in the U.S. military between World War II and the present day. And, the guy just doesn't stop. He is now in production of his 3rd documentary film, Crowning Achievement, featuring a dozen former Miss America pageant winners. I first met Bob when I opened an office in Century City in Los Angeles. He was a young associate working for the legendary music lawyer Fred Ansis and an incredible entertainment lawyer Susan Grode. And I remember him very well as a young associate who was eager to learn, and he did exactly that. And then eventually he moved on to his career that we're going to talk about today. Bob, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the great introduction. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, no, it's good to see you.
Happy to catch up with you.
Yeah, definitely. Let's do some catching up right away. First, tell our viewers a little bit about Bob and where he came from, where he grew up, what motivated him in his early years, and why you ultimately decided to become a lawyer.
All right, sure. I grew up in Ohio, suburbs of Cleveland. No lawyers in the family, but I kind of remember it was probably in 4th grade when I was 9 years old. One of the teachers at open house told my mom that I was going to make a very good lawyer because I like to argue. And I think that just stuck with me. I mean, I think we heard that at another open house a couple more years later. And I even though I didn't even know any lawyers, except the ones I would see on TV, Perry Mason or something like that at that time, it just always was my plan that I was going to become an attorney. I graduated a year early, so I was 16 when I graduated high school. I took a year off and worked, saved a little bit of money for college. Wound up at that time, going on college tours and having your parents take you to visit 10 different places was not really a thing. So I applied to Arizona State. I think it was the only college that I applied to, even though I guess my credentials were a lot stronger, and at that time probably could have gone to a top school. I think it was just coming out of Ohio. I mailed away for the brochure. It was sunshine, swimming pools, cactuses. I thought, okay, this is where I want to go. And I'm glad I did. I think 10 days after moving to Arizona, I was jumping out of an airplane in the desert and then going to visit the Grand Canyon. And it was, I guess everything I wanted, but I had not been to Arizona until the day I showed up with all my belongings to go to college. So there was no advance, no advance visit.
So why Georgetown and then why LA?
So, and then, again, as I mentioned, I knew I wanted to be an attorney. I took a, broad liberal arts, background and at school, a lot of English courses to learn how to write well. And then psychology was ultimately my major. I did my senior year. I went to the Sorbonne, uh, first time, kind of studying in France for a semester. I picked Georgetown because while I didn't know much about being an attorney, what seemed to interest me at that time was I wanted to be, an international attorney, something global, focus on international trade, and Georgetown seemed to be the appropriate place to do that. So I actually worked first year as a 1L and got a job at the French embassy during my first year. And the project, it was when private television was coming to France for the first time. So wound up writing some papers and articles for the embassy about that. Even though I didn't know yet I wanted to be an entertainment lawyer, it kind of crossed over with what I was doing at the embassy at the time.
So when did you get the bug to be an entertainment lawyer, and why did you decide to go to LA?
Yeah, so I again thought I wanted to do international trade. My second year summer, which is the big summer job uh, position, I worked at Wilkie Farr and Gallagher in their international trade group. Got to learn more about that practice. I had a great summer, but learned that it was about traveling to Brazil and Thailand and being in a conference room or a warehouse filled with boxes for a month at a time. And it didn't seem as dynamic as I originally envisioned to do anti-dumping and countervailing duty type of cases. So at Georgia, I know some law schools now have fully developed, entertainment course curriculum. At Georgetown, there was really, I mean, apart from copyright law, there was only one entertainment class. I took the seminar class. It was one where you had to write a paper at the end of it or as part of the class. Enjoyed the class. They had it was really outside speakers for most every class, and liked hearing about what everyone was doing at the time. We were having our first child. So I focused in on a topic of children in the entertainment industry. Two young child actors had been killed on the set of the Twilight Zone movie at that time, along with a more known actor, Vic Morrow. So I wound up writing a piece about the comparative piece between the laws in California and New York about the protections and the laws governing the engagement of minors. And I was on the Georgetown Law Journal at the time. They initially rejected the article, so I sent it to some legal publications in Los Angeles. Loyola picked it up for their entertainment law publication, and then Georgetown wanted it, and I said, "Oh, I'm gonna shift and have that go to California, where I think I'm gonna wind up working after law school."
So where was your first law firm in California?
I started out of law school at Paul Hastings. Didn't work there that long. I worked in the Santa Monica office, which was beautiful across from the ocean. I worked there for really just a little bit more than a year or so. I interviewed with the firm that you were at, Hall Dickler, about a year and 4 months after I had started working. At Paul Hastings, I was doing a mix of entertainment litigation and some transactional work. And I knew that it was the transactional work that I most enjoyed. And so, shifting to work at Hall Dickler, where I would have that, 100% full-time experience doing transactional work, was what I wanted to do.
And the rest is history. We'll talk about it a little bit now. So as you started as a young attorney, tell me about the mentors you encountered and how important they were to your developing your practice.
Yeah, I'd say, coming out of law school in the late 80s, there wasn't a lot of focus and emphasis on, mentorship, and particularly in a lot in entertainment where people like to keep clients kind of close to them. But at Hall Dickler, there were, I'd say, two of the partners that I worked with, Fred Antis and Susan Grode, who you mentioned, who, again, we were a smaller office of the New York firm. So I, worked closely with three partners there, uh, and one focused on film finance, one focused primarily in music. Susan Grode's practice was a bit more broad-based in terms of art, book publishing, and some television work. And I think that at the end, Fred Ansis would work kind of a long later day. And at the end of the day, I'd sit in his office, and after we'd go through the work product, he'd spend maybe an hour telling me about, war stories and his experience, or just generalized philosophizing about life and that. And I find, over the past couple decades, I carry that on here, sometime we'll have a margarita night or, cocktails here at the office. And I sit there pontificating and sharing stories, and not just about the law, but about, getting comfortable in your practice and in life. And, that's definitely Fred's influence. And with Susan, it seemed like she was getting a new client or a new referral every single day. And in terms of drafting, what I learned from her was a lot about how, especially in entertainment law, there's a lot of forms that people use. And Susan's emphasis was on personalizing those forms to the situation and not just, filling in the blanks. But, if you're doing an agreement between two individuals, maybe instead of owner, purchaser, grantor, grantee, use the people's names, make it, make the draft and the contract a bit more conversational. So it's easier for people to pick up and kind of feel a connection to a legal document.
So, so as you developed as a young associate, you decided that you wanted to build your own book of business, which you've obviously done a phenomenal job doing. What were some of the methods you used to attract your first clients, and how did you build your practice?
Yeah, and that too, it started fairly early in my career, and it started at Hall Dickler. There was I'd say one of the business motivating factors for that was, at that time, Hall Dickler had a program that, as an associate, where normally you're on a kind of a fixed salary, maybe there's a discretionary bonus at the end of the year. But at Hall Dickler, you were able to receive 10% of the collections on those matters that you originated. And so it was a way to, I'd been a waiter in college, and it seemed like a way to kind of earn tips, in addition to the salary. So, at the time, if a client paid a $3,000 bill, I mean, the firm didn't hold it till the end of the year. You got it in a next paycheck or two. I would receive $300. Wow, that will take the family out for, movies, and we can go to dinner, and, something extra for the week. So it definitely, I'll answer the question about attracting business, but I think that got me comfortable talking to clients about money at a very early age or early point in my career, which even, I think you see partners now, even if they're good at landing business, they're uncomfortable talking about money with clients, and and collecting from clients. So that was certainly a motivator. I come to LA from Georgetown. I was not particularly connected in the LA community. I think sometimes I, wish I had gone to USC or UCLA. Everybody seemed to know agents and managers and people at studios, and I didn't have those connections. But, initially built relationships through the Beverly Hills Bar Association. I did a lot of work at that time on behalf of the American Cinematheque, which was, they still have film programs that they curate and screen, and I would help organize that. Through that, I got to meet some filmmakers. In fact, two of my very first clients ever, I still work with today. Documentary filmmaker, and another one who had done a short at that time, who's now done some directing for television. That they're not my largest clients, but in any respect, but we still have that relationship 30 years later. So by joining those film organizations, doing things that were otherwise entertaining and fun for me, then and letting people know that you're an attorney, got the word out early on.
So as you developed your career early on and networked the way you did to build all your connections, what were some of the tactics or strategies you used to attract specific clients? Did you target them? How'd you learn about them? What was your methodology to actually attract a particular client that you wanted to bring in?
I think initially, certainly for 10 years, and maybe even now, it's sometimes a bit scattershot. It took some time to learn kind of that focus and what was the best use of my time. I definitely would go to lunch a lot, which adds to the workday. I would often try to, I guess my expression would be like lunch up, lunch with more senior executives, in-house attorneys than were perhaps even at my level. Sometime I would do that with the support of another partner in the firm, and with their okay, say, is it okay if I call so and so and say that you suggested that we have lunch together? And most of the time, people would be fine with that. So I would get those meetings that were a little bit beyond me even, or reach out, make a stretch, and try to meet the general counsels at the major studios, even though I wasn't yet doing deals with them. I often had lunch with opposing counsel, and when we closed a deal, and get to know them. Within entertainment, people move quite a lot. So even eventually I learned, even going with now, I spend a lot of time with people who are very junior in their career in-house, and they might not yet have the opportunity to give out business, but 2-3 years from now, people move quickly. Next, they're an associate general counsel at a smaller company, or they're deputy general counsel, or move, within 3 years, 4 years to a general counsel at a company. And so, I think people remember if you've, connected with them early on in their career and, made yourself available to them. So it was a lot of lunching, and that as I traveled internationally, primarily at that time for my personal life, if I went to any place, I would reach out and try to meet local lawyers who worked within entertainment. This wound up, and even to this day, is a great referral source of business. If I was recently in South Africa in January, and I hung out with the partners at the top entertainment law firm there and got to spend time with them. And by meeting people at another firm, well, then you're potentially available to all of their clients, right? You don't have to go and do individual pitch meetings at 30 different companies in South Africa, but if they're all represented by, one of the firms, and that firm likes you, they'll refer you, to their clients when needs arise.
It's funny. It's interesting you say that. One of the things I always tried to teach the young attorneys is that networking, as painful as it can be at times, is critically important to building your practice, to get your name out there, to meet people, sometimes in awkward situations. Sometimes you're a little nervous, you're a little intimidated. But if you don't jump out there and do it, I used to jokingly say, it's like the old line from Listerine: you hate it, but you take it every day. You got to get out there. You just got to be pitching. Because in the end of the day, we may be lawyers by education, but we're salesmen when it really comes down to it. If you're going to sell the practice, you're going to build the practice. If you're not comfortable doing that and are able to get out there and figure out how to be comfortable with that, you're not going to have the kinds of successes that folks like you have had. It takes a certain tenacity to go out there and just keep at it, and have a lot of doors closed, a lot of doors opened. It's just a process that takes a long period of time. And you've done a marvelous job of it over the decades of your practice.
I mean, you mentioned about targeting or particular clients. I know that for sure at points in my career, I've reached out to someone and said, "Oh, I'm going to be in Seattle for something else. Be great if I could, meet you for a drink or grab lunch with you while I'm in town." And that's the only reason I'm going to town is
Right,
to
exactly,
have
exactly.
that
They don't have
meeting.
to know the real reason you're going.
If I get that meeting. And I think, meeting with companies or individuals who are represented by other counsel, I still think is valuable. And sometimes people kind of will not go meet with that person because they think, oh, well, they're already represented by this other firm. That other firm could have a conflict on a particular matter, or there's a certain niche of your practice where even though, they're very comfortable with firm A on this tranche of matters, since they've met you, they will slice off a piece of that work. On those type of meetings, I don't try to, approach it as a very hard sell as much as, look, I'm going to be in town, or I'd love to meet and hear what you guys are doing at your company, right? And maybe there's some crossover with some of our existing clients, and and to stay relevant over time and say, oh, one of the producers or one of the companies that we're represent are also working in this space. You two should meet, and so you become a resource to them instead of hounding them for business. You stay kind of relevant to them and add value along the way, and then eventually some opportunities, you plant those seeds and eventually an opportunity arises. Sometimes it's immediate, other times it could be 2, 3, 4 years later.
One of the interesting things you're observing there is that you're articulating how important it is that the individual you're targeting, if you want to use that word, doesn't want to hear your elevator speech right out of the box. They want to have the perception that you care about them, you care about what their concerns are. And I stress to young attorneys that the more you get someone to like you by telling them you're concerned about them, and you learn more as you can about them individually, and their wants, their needs, or whatever it is, the more they're going to like you because they perceive you as liking them. And in the end of the day, you want to work with people you like. So I always tell young attorneys, take that elevator speech and chuck it. That's the worst way you can begin a conversation by talking about yourself, because it's going to turn people off, as opposed to what you just articulated, where you go and you just say, tell me about, what's going on, what's, in the industry and whatever it is. And just building those connections over time. There's a concept in marketing that you probably heard of, that studies have shown that you need to touch somebody with your product 7 times. And there's actually studies on this. And at that point, in the 7th time, they're going to remember you. They've been programmed into you program yourself into their brain. So they're almost subconsciously thinking about the product at that point in time, so that they remember you more efficiently. And that's what you hit on a little earlier, where you'd follow up. There's so many occasions where I've spoken to young attorneys who I went to this event, I met so and so, and I said, well, what did you do after that? How did you follow up with the person? What did you learn about the person? And how did you continue the conversation? And they're like a deer in headlights. They didn't know they were supposed to do that. It's something that comes naturally to some people like yourself, but others can learn it. And this is what I try to stress to lawyers who are a little uncomfortable with that. It's really kind of easy to do. There's different techniques you can use, but keeping in touch with people over what may be a very long period of time. It can be years. You're exactly right, before you're going to get the return on your investment. But unless you make that investment in individuals and learning about them, you're not going to get any return on that. You're going to sit there wondering why after 20 years you still have a small book of business. It's not rocket science that we're talking about here. It's just building relationships with people.
I mean, I think I try to leave, particularly in meeting with either international media companies or international law firms, it's very easy to leave them with something of value, which is, look, great to meet you. Consider me a resource. not even like you don't need to engage me. Just consider me as a resource.
Mhm.
If you're doing business in Hollywood and you want some information, have I ever worked with the opposing counsel before? Have I ever worked with that company before? Have I seen this issue before? Run it by me. Happy to share my knowledge with you. And it's a great way to connect. I mean, you're investing what, 15 minutes, 30 minutes of time sometime just to kind of get to know that person even better and on a substantive level. And it's very much remembered and appreciated. And people do reach out, and this way they might not yet be ready to hire opposing or local counsel here, but they say, oh, that guy was so responsive, so helpful. And if the matter blows up, yeah, we'll bring you in a bigger way on it.
So let me ask you this. At some point in your career, as you were developing your clients, you mentioned earlier about some lawyers like to hold on to their clients and not let other people in. I think it's safe to say that those lawyers who do that hit a ceiling in what business they can develop, because there's just so many hours in a day that someone can work. At some point, the ones who achieve greatness are those who are willing to delegate, who are willing to let go of their clients and trust that the job will be done well and stuff. I suspect that you have a large group of people that work with you and you delegate a good deal of the work to others. And then by doing so, you just raise the water and the boat rises with it, and you get a lot more business out of that.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I think the team that I have here is 28 lawyers, who work with me. And at one time, it was 28 associates. So I was the most leveraged partner in the firm. Over the past 18 months, three of them have now been elevated to partner, which is great. People who worked on my team. And so, yeah, I mean, definitely got very comfortable delegating and yet staying aware of everything that's going on. Obviously, you can't be in the weeds on every single item. But I think over time, the lieutenants that I've had working with me all practice in the same style as I do. If something is coming out from my team, all 28, it sounds very much the same. The deliverable looks the same. The way we communicate. Of course, everybody's got their own personality, and I think it's important to kind of share personality in communications, but maybe kind of the crispness of crispness of tone. It sounded like Christmas. The immediately being responsive and service oriented. Like if you work with me or someone on the team, you get the same level of service in that way from everyone. And I think that was part of the delegation, is part of the brand building or the brand extension.
And how what have been some of your strategies or tactics to motivate the younger attorneys that work with you to build and to be part?
Oh, at the moment, there's actually a first year working with me, who's originally from China. This guy's brought in, I'd say, like 8 clients in his first year, and some companies in that. And we have team meetings twice a week. If somebody's landed something new, we definitely talk about it. Everybody gets excited for them. They all kind of clap for them. And I think we do a lot of events where everyone on the team gets to meet everyone at the company that we're working with. So if something, I think it's important on the delegation, it's important to manage the client in that respect as well. So if I'm taking a meeting with a potential new client, I don't do the meeting alone and then try to bring in an associate who now they'll wonder, why are you passing me off? I'll have, a couple of associates join me in that meeting, the pitch meeting from the get-go. And that way, if, one of the other associate on the team is going to be working with them, the client has already met him or her, and because they were there at the original meeting.
Well, that's a very astute observation, where the difference between giving the perception to the client that you're passing them off to somebody as opposed to coming in with a team so that they see that it is a team effort and they're not being passed off when somebody else on the team is doing some of the work is a key issue to building a practice. I can remember when I was coming up that it was rare for my mentors to bring me to meetings. They would go on their own, and they were more tight-fisted back in those days with their clients. So I'd have figured out how to scratch it out myself in various ways. But I learned relatively early in my career when I had some success that bringing that team philosophy into meetings was far more productive and much easier to manage client expectations when you had that kind of philosophy coming in. And I think clients appreciate that.
They do. They see it. We always talk in this, and even all of our written communications as we and our, and not my client, I, and so there is always this kind of collectiveness, and we really enforce the team nature and the teamwork that we do together, and that spills over, into the clients. And I see it in the writings back. Love working with your team. That comes back rather than love working with you, love working with the team. And I of the folks that work with me, I think we cover at least 12 different languages. So maybe doing a little bit of research about who you'll be meeting in advance is important. Maybe where are they from? So again, if I'm meeting with someone and they were originally from Dallas, I know I have someone on the team from Dallas or from Texas, I'll have them come in on the pitch meeting. If somebody speaks Portuguese, I'll bring in the guy from Brazil, and he'll be part of the pitch meeting, and we connect on that level. I think it's always better to pitch in teams of people, because it kind of going back to your, the elevator pitch and how distasteful it can be if you're saying I. It plays much better if I'm bragging about one or two of the people on my team and not talking about myself, but speaking about their accomplishments. And then they can say, oh, well, you did something similar, and it just really, that the pride that we have in each other is communicated. The closeness amongst us gets communicated. And I think sometimes, maybe I could be a great lawyer or a great fit for some people. It might not be for someone else, but we can still get the business because maybe they liked one of the associates working with me a lot better than they liked me. And they still want to come to the firm, and they're happy that they'll be working mostly, with one of the other folks. I mean, you have a lot better chance of connecting, with one or two other people that you're meeting with if you've got a couple on your side, because maybe they want to talk about, the Patriots, and I'm not going to be the person to do that. But one of the people who's with me can do that.
Right. No, you hit on something very interesting. It's that ego thing that gets in the way of lawyers all the time. We study and we're educated to be individuals and to be advocates, and it's a kind of an I environment when you're coming up through the ranks, and to learn how to make that switch to the we and our approach is something that a lot of lawyers can't do, and it's something that just their egos just get in their way of doing that kind of thing. But you have it. You did it right. Obviously, you're doing it right. That's the history shows that. Let me ask you a question about Robert Darwell, the brand, because you've been able to build yourself in the industry as a brand, so that when you walk in a room, your reputation precedes you. People know your credibility. I often say when I give speeches and talks to lawyers, I ask a bunch of them to raise their hand if they buy Clorox bleach. And a whole bunch of people raise their hand, they buy Clorox bleach. And I said, do you understand that Clorox bleach, the store brand version, which is much cheaper, is chemically identical to what's in Clorox? Now, why are you buying Clorox? You're buying Clorox because it's a brand that you trust, and you have just an association with immediate identification as quality and a resource that you want to use. You've done that with Robert Darwell. I mean, you are a brand. So tell us some of the ways you think this may be an awkward question. Now I'm going to get to the I part now. We're talking about you now. It's your ego up front. How do you think you became such a dominant brand in the entertainment business?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's great that you're focused on branding. I think I focused on it for much of my career as well, but at three levels. Me at the center of it, right? Yep, building my own personal brand, and then the team brand around me, so that now, if you're getting someone from the Shepherd Mullen Entertainment Department, you understand what you're getting, and then the firm as the final ring. I know it's almost the reverse of some people want to go work for a brand name firm, right?
Mhm.
And like, oh, I want to go to Skadden. That name is going to attract business. I've always just been at the center of the brand. Of course, I'm here to build the reputation for the group that I work in, and then of course build the reputation and always include the firm as part of it as well. I know building the personal brand. I think it gets easier over time and probably kicked in more in my early 40s, where people began to know more who I was. And I think even it's some of the quirkier things that I've done have perpetuated that brand. Uh, I always tell people part of my best training for being a lawyer in a law firm was having been a waiter in college. It's the a lot of different transferable skill sets. You arrive at a table and you don't know those people at all. Who do you, and you've got 5 or 6 tables. You need to be kind of a different person at each table, right? And adapt to those folks with very little cue. So same with the clients that we're going to be working with, right? Each one wants things done in their particular style. And so it's not one style for every single client. So you have to adapt in that way. And it also taught me about delegation, to keep the table clean. I might not be able to get there, but, send a bus boy, go grab that. So send a paralegal in. And it just also taught me about that service orientation. Everyone wants to be taken care of, right away, notwithstanding the fact that you've got 5 or 6 other things going on. So I think I built my brand around service and people knowing that, they could really get me 24/7. And despite where I might be traveling in the world, I'll still pick up the phone. I'll take the call. I'll do the Zoom at 4 a.m. from wherever I am. And in terms of some of the quirkier things, I mean, when Instagram first started, probably 12 years ago, or when I first became aware of it, people were taking pictures of their food or their cocktail and that. And I started taking a picture of a waiter or a waitress or a bartender every day and writing a little story about them. And I wanted to honor people in the hospitality business. And it called it the Daily Server. I mean, I had not been on Facebook. I had no social media profile, but over time it built to over, 20,000 followers on Instagram, just looking at the waiter or the bartender that I met that day. So it reinforced my commitment to service, showed kind of my travels, and I did it every single day without ever missing a day for 10 years. And that, I think, too, kind of reinforced in clients who followed and that, or would, some people would, even before I went to go meet somebody I was pitching, they're like, oh, I follow you on Instagram. And they began to know a little bit about who I was. It was a lot of wordplay in the write-up that I would do. And they said, it's amazing to me how consistent you are in doing that. So in an odd way, without pitching or trying to convince someone that I'm consistent, and dependable every single day, they kind of got to see it through that other means. So that was one way. And then again, I think people know that they've called me on a camel in Morocco, and I've done a conference call, And, I think for some clients, it's even a joke. They'll be, where in the world is Bob Darwell? And, so, oh, I'm in Cape Town, South Africa. Oh, okay, great. And then we move on,
Yeah.
So,
Well, it's interesting because, the one of the things about brand building is that consistency you're talking about, and how do you break through the clutter? Because most pitches that come from law firms or from lawyers are the same as every other pitch you see. There's nothing unique about them, and you're just part of it. You're a commodity. You're part of the rank and file. When you try to do things that are outside the ordinary and break out of the box, those are things that they can really make a difference. In one example I'll give you that I did was when it came to holiday cards, I hated holiday cards because a million of them went out at the same time and everybody would sort of just throw them in the garbage. So I decided I'd do my card at Thanksgiving when no one else was doing it. So I'd do a little write up and I'd send a card out to, all my clients and contacts. And then I came up with the idea, well, I got to do a little bit more than that. So I decided that I would enclose a CD of a relatively unknown group that I had discovered, quote unquote, in
Mhm.
my search of music. And I would just do this. I did this for years. I did this. And then one year I decided, whatever reason, I either didn't do it for whatever the reason was. I was amazed at how many clients called me and said, "Where's my CD?" I look forward to your CD every year, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. I go, "Wow, I really blew it because I didn't continue that tradition." And it takes time and it takes effort. 10 years of every day on Instagram is amazing that you were able to do that, but it works. I mean, the bottom line is it works, and it's that kind of commitment to those quirkier things that you do that set you apart and take you from being a commodity into being a brand, as you've done you've done so well in your career. Let me take a pivot here and sort of the issue that I think faces law firms and lawyers today in particular is the skill set that young lawyers need to have today to be able to compete with the technology and the AI and everything that's happening that's really turning our profession upside down in so many ways. Tell me how you're coping. What are your perspectives on that, and what do you think the skill sets are that young attorneys need to have today to succeed?
Yeah, I mean, Doug, it's really only recently that we've talked more about, kind of the coming wave of technology and, clients are looking for ways to, and I think the term is like de-lawyer certain activities that they have. So, really been emphasizing to everyone to like find that value add that you're going to be able to bring to the table. And I think it may even mean that kind of some of our practice will have to shift some. I mean, most of the day we draft and negotiate agreements. We've not so, and we're largely on the institutional rather than the talent side of the business, representing banks and production companies and producers and studios networks. And that, so we've sold ourselves really as real lawyers, lawyers, and not necessarily as like agents and brokers, the people that have that out there as part of their, part of what they do. And I think over the next 10 years, in terms of being an entertainment lawyer, we may have to shift to becoming more of those agents and brokers in terms of creating some opportunities for ourselves, having someone call us not merely to generate some piece of paper that an AI program can kick out, but they'd be reaching out because they really want to know, tell me about this company and the people that are there and what are the problems with that company and can you make introductions to this company for me? So I think it's really a time where we all have to think about what value add can we bring in addition, or even in lieu of some of the merely pure legal work that we've been doing.
It's interesting. I found that, and I'm somewhat of a Luddite. When I started out in practicing law, there weren't even fax machines. Our big breakthrough when I went to the first law firm I went to was they got IBM correcting Selectric typewriters, which was mind-boggling that it could correct something with the white out keyed into the actual ball that had the letters on it. And if you wanted to do a tally, you took out one ball and put in another ball. I mean, it was that was that kind of mechanical approach to doing things. And so I was on the cusp of the demise of carbon paper and all those kinds of things as I get my practice. But I love technology, and I'm one of those guys who just, if it's new, I want it because it's just what I want to do. And I found that the fear that people have of AI today is very misplaced. I think that it can become an incredible tool, particularly with respect to building your practice. And it's just like sort of what you said before, you can do research and learn about people and about companies and about their needs and challenges so much easier now today than it used to be, the efforts that you had to go through to do that kind of analysis. So you can be one step ahead of a lot of the competition by embracing it more and using it more as a marketing tool and a marketing development tool than looking at it as something that's going to replace you at some point, in time. And who knows? I think it's a lot of hyperbole that lawyers are going to get replaced. I mean, I don't think that's in the cards in any fashion, at least not in my lifetime, and not in yours either.
Yeah, I mean, I
That
think clients will value you if you're able to use it effectively, which is, if we are constantly looking at ways to use AI or, machine generated learning, other things to help, bring down a client's bill, right? And then that, of course, creates more loyalty and trust between you and the client because they know that, you're working to keep their
right.
fees down
That gets back
without,
to your that gets back
without
to your point.
compromising on the legal work.
Yeah, I mean, and that gets back to your point about not being afraid to talk about the money. It's interesting that so many lawyers are afraid to bill a certain amount of their time. They'll write it off before they bill it. And after the client calls and says something, they immediately write off more. It's almost like they want to avoid the conversation about money and the rest of that relationship. And most clients welcome those conversations because you learn more, they learn more. And it may be a somewhat awkward conversation, but it's one that many lawyers really, fear having with clients, which is really a misplaced perception that lawyers have with their clients. Let me move on in the time we have left to talk about not the law, but how you've developed a completely different line of focus and your life work balance between your documentaries and your DJing and all these other things you're doing. Talk a little bit more about that and how does that balance your life?
Well, I mean, I think, maybe at the time, as I said, we're having our first child, daughter, when I was in law school, which was quite young to be, becoming a parent and, not yet even being at the law firm, and then having kind of the second and third, I think both while I was working at Hall Dickler as a junior lawyer. At the time, it was a lot of pressure and stress, in terms of financially having a larger family. I was a little too young or too junior to hang out with the partners and their families. And I was a little bit different than the associates who didn't, were still dating and didn't yet have their families. But, flash forward, the kids were out of the house while I was still relatively young. And so, at that point, I've had now a decade and a half of being able to add things back into my life because it isn't focused as much on, I mean, of course, still very close and see the kids all the time, but not spent on raising a family. So I could add a few more things back that are, meaningful to me. The DJing was something it almost came out of a challenge. I've always loved music. And always, I guess, like you, Doug, I like suggesting, new artists, new bands to people. And it was came out of a dispute when I was at a party in Argentina, and there was a gray-haired DJ there, and I said, "Oh, wish look, gives me inspiration. I could do that, And somebody said, "Oh, you don't have the beat." And from the moment I heard that, I'm like, "Oh, I'm gonna DJ." And I, I didn't even know what I was doing, but I booked a party and an event, like 10 days later. And so then quickly had to, learn the technology to do that. So, now I have fun with it. I don't actually have the beat, but I do have, I DJ a little bit like a lawyer. I DJ thematically more than to the beat. And so I think that I've kind of, it's the unique playlist that I do is what's probably more interesting than me, hitting the beat all the time. And then the filmmaking I added into my life a few years ago. Of course, loved movies uh, my whole career. But it was kind of during 2020, working from home. It's not that I had more time then, but I guess, not having to drive to and from the office, I had a little more, self-reflect time to self-reflect and to think about, all right, I've always thought I've wanted to do something that highlighted the value and the wisdom of the well-aged. Let me just start doing this documentary about folks in their 90s from 90 to 99. And documentary style, interview style like that fit into my work schedule because I wasn't following some other schedule. I could do one a month, two a month, and squeeze these in. And again, didn't quite know what I was doing, but learned to love it. I mean, certainly loved having the conversations with folks, and then found that I was not the editor, but I was there through the editing process and learned how that's really where my skills as a lawyer translated into being a filmmaker in terms of, as lawyers, we're natural editors, right? We don't need that. That's already been said. And, kind of was able to make something fairly tight. It was a thrill to be accepted to any film festival. And then, with that first film, it played over 20 film festivals. And then to find out that, a few of them that I won Best Documentary was fantastic. And, probably much like your writing, right? You get the bug and wow, I'm getting some acclaim for doing this. And so then, I've enjoyed following through with that format and kind of continuing to share. I love oral history. So, my voice doesn't appear on camera. My face doesn't appear on camera, but I'm the one asking all the questions and conducting all the interviews and, just learn so much from listening to other people.
So tell us about the one that you're currently producing on Miss America pageant.
Yeah, growing up, the Miss America pageant was probably like one of the top 3 programs of the year, after Academy Awards, Super Bowl, and then it would be Miss America. And I started this one. I'm doing 12. The documentaries are kind of the same format. I'm doing 12 interviews, 12 former Miss Americas, focusing on their achievements and accomplishments after having won the title. The first one I interviewed is the oldest living Miss America, Miss 1948. So someone from the 40s, the 50s, 60s, till present day. Actually, I'm scheduled on Monday. I'm flying to Houston and I'm interviewing Miss 2011. She was the youngest Miss America since the 1930s. She was crowned when she was 17. And she's actually a lawyer at Paul Hastings in Houston. So,
oh, wow.
First firm out of school. So it'll be very interesting to interview a Miss America who's in big law.
I remember when I first started writing books, my novels, I thought, well, if I reach out to somebody and I want to talk to them for a source in a book, whether it was about whatever the topic was, and I call them out of the blue and just say, hey, I'm Doug Wood, I'm writing a novel, can I talk to you? I expected them to say, go pound sand. I have no idea who you are and why would I talk to you? The exact opposite happens. I found in writing novels that I was able to reach out to people, former president, clerics, terrorists, you name it, because my books are thriller kind of books. And I was amazed at how many people would actually embrace the idea of talking to me. And I'd imagine, I suspect that in doing your documentaries on these wonderful topics you're doing them on, that you experience that same kind of reception, that people do want to talk to you because nobody else is really asking them their opinions. And they have so much they want to say.
I had such good fortune with the first 2. There are a lot of 90-year-olds out there. The thing is, from day one, though, I knew I wanted real people, but I wanted one celebrity was my wish list, which was Dick Van Dyke. And then I was able to get him, for the documentary. And, so I had mentioned to someone here in the office that, my dream is to have Dick Van Dyke, and in the documentary, they ran into him at the gym in Malibu, mentioned it to him. Next day, I was on the phone with him, and a couple of weeks later at his house filming him. But and then Black veterans, of course, there's many of them, so I was able to get those. I will say the Miss Americas are a little more challenging. It's a more finite universe of people, but there's a close sisterhood and bond and connection amongst them. So I think now that I've started the project and interviewed a number of them, there's a lot more, trust and information sharing amongst them, so that if I reach out, they can reach out to somebody else I've interviewed, and then, I have kind of the backup and the credibility for them to say yes.
So you're still young in your career. You've got plenty of years ahead. Have you given thought to what is your life after law?
I think I started fantasizing about retirement. I'm retiring at 40 was, probably in my 30s, I was thinking I would like to retire at 40. And then, that date kept getting pushed. I mean, I sometimes joke, like law is my sport. I do love it still. I get turned on, landing the clients, learning interesting new issues, pulling off kind of the impossible in terms of, and when I represented Amazon, and we were helping them purchase MGM, and we had to look at, chain of title on 20 projects within a very truncated period of time, and being able to accomplish those type of things is like, wow, right? It's like, running a marathon or something. So I know that, when I would retire, I'm certainly going to miss that day-to-day, charge that I get from practicing law. I think I'll miss the team of people who I work with in terms of that daily interaction, but I know we'll all remain in touch. I think probably for the first decade of retirement, I will be somewhat nomadic. I kind of have been for the past 20 years. I mean, I'll have a home base somewhere, somewhere in the US. I currently have an apartment in Paris. I work from there 2-3 times a year. So I would, have longer stretches there and use that as a home base to, travel around Europe. And I've seen a lot of the world, but places that I need and would like to go where, to have 4 or 6 weeks in a particular place unencumbered by the day-to-day practice of law, sounds pretty exciting to me.
What's inspirational about what you just said is that I often talk to a lot of senior lawyers now who I use the expression that we all eventually hit our use-by date. And that if you don't recognize that as being an inevitable conclusion at some point in your life, and you haven't prepared for that by having diversions and doing other things with your life and whatever, then you're going to have a very, very hard landing when that time comes. And that what you need to do is you need to plan for that early on, find those diversions early on, and find your passions outside the law early on. And you've done a marvelous job of that, and are an inspiration, I think, for the viewers that are seeing this episode, because you not only are a very successful lawyer, but you've got another life that is just as passionate for you as your law is, and that is unique. That's a unique characterization, Bob. Not a lot of people can say that, and that's why I wanted to have you as a guest on this show, because you are the epitome of how someone balances that love and passion for law and also finds other outlets that they can go to get the rewards that they want, in their lives. And you've done that beautifully. So my compliments, very, very sincerely, my compliments to you. Last question, and we'll end our little session here. It's a typical question, but I'm getting very interesting answers from folks. What do you think is the most important advice you can give a young aspiring lawyer and a more senior lawyer who's approaching the end of their career?
Well, I think we talked about some of the things for the junior lawyers in terms of kind of the marketing and getting out there and hustling, and it isn't really about connect, having that direct connection to business. You've got to lay the groundwork and the seeds, uh, but technical excellence you can't replace. I mean, a great connection will get you in the door, but if you're not a good lawyer, you're not going to have that client very long. And it's funny. I mean, don't never go off and like I don't go off and poach other firms' clients, but a lot of times we'll be given an opportunity because people call us and are leaving their firm because despite the rates that people pay and that there's super smart people at all these big firms, service is probably the number one reason I see a lot of clients leave their firm. They don't.
So let's shift though. Let's shift to then what we didn't talk all that much about, but you've obviously got senior lawyers that you deal with that are nearing retirement or recently retired. What advice would you give them?
Well, in interviewing the 90-year-olds that I talked to, they're very different people, Doug. They were, grew up in different parts of the country, different races. One was a 90-year-old who was the oldest performing drag queen in the United States. One was a lawyer for Martin Luther King. Extremely different people, but the one common denominator that I saw amongst them was that this group of people who I interviewed and why they were so dynamic is they still had goals and things that they wanted to accomplish, and I think a lot of lawyers, do become kind of careerist, and their goal is whether it's, achieving a certain level on management or a certain financial level at their law firm. And then this stops. Well, what's next, right? So I think, going into retirement, you certainly have to have that next set of goals for yourself, whether it's to learn a particular language, perfect a souffle, climb the highest peaks in 10 different countries. So I would start building that goal list, devote 20 hours a week to, volunteer organizations, knowing what things are important to you, what would be fun. And, just like you approached your career in achieving goals, getting to a certain school, achieving a certain degree, rising to the, top 7% of the class, whatever it is that you want, have that roadmap for your retirement.
It's interesting. When I was approaching my use by date from the active practice of law, I decided that I ought to approach it just like you were saying. I would approach it the same way I developed my practice, with a plan and with goals and the like. And I just assumed at the time that I would just reach out to consultants and law firms who had this down already, because I can't be the first one who ever faced this kind of dilemma. And what I found was amazing is that law firms in general don't address this. They don't have programs for their more senior attorneys. And there's so many things that law firms could do that I now lecture on. But in the end of the day, you're absolutely right, Bob, that the individual has to approach it the same way they approached their young years, with goals. We call it a bucket list. I don't care what you call it, but to have things that are going to get your passions going and get your blood flowing, that you can go out there and do that, because there's nothing more sad than an ex-lawyer who has nothing to do. I mean, their brain just disintegrates. It's an awful way to end a very vibrant livelihood. But in any event, I don't want to end on a negative note, though, because I think that that there are so many opportunities for senior lawyers out there. You mentioned some, there's many others, and I think that that's the change that I hope some of the episodes in this series will inspire, like you can inspire people to think about that in a very productive way. So,
yeah, no, it's great that that's been your focus in helping law firms do that. I mean, it's kind of, I mean, I notice it, most law firms have talent management programs for kind of new and junior rising lawyers, and it kind of cuts off at associates.
Yep.
And I always think it'd be very valuable to have that same type of thing for partners, right? If once a year somebody knocked on my door and said, "Hey, what's your goal this year? How can we help you accomplish it?" It'd be extraordinary.
Yep.
And then even more important, the period of time that you're talking about, where people are going to be kind of leaving their law firm, going off into the world. You want them to have, fond memories of their alma mater law firm, and, they're going to be out there, where there'll be great sources of business, potentially anybody that they bump into. Hey, talk to my colleague back at the firm.
Exactly.
And, the firm should be prepared to give these kind of helpful send-offs to their partners instead of, thank you.
Well,
Goodbye. Next.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that'll be our send off for today, Bob.
All right.
Thanks, but I know that you've inspired the viewers, and I thank you again for being a guest on the podcast, and I'm sure we'll be talking again soon. And
Appreciate
best
it.
of luck with your next documentary. I'm looking forward. I watched the first two.
Oh,
And
great.
I'm looking forward to the third. So thanks again, Bob, and have a great day.
Okay. Thank you very much.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us on the Dawn to Dusk podcast. You can learn more on building and transitioning a multi-million-dollar law practice in Doug's book, From Dawn to Dusk, How to Build a Multi-Million-Dollar Law Practice and Then Give It Away. If you're interested in working with Doug, suggesting future guests, or have questions you'd like Doug to ask guests in upcoming episodes, reach out to him at douglas.wood@wood.law or visit his website at dawntodusk.wood.law. And if you enjoyed the podcast, don't forget to subscribe and share it with your peers. Until next time, we appreciate your viewership.